The 1960s. It is one of the most unique time periods in United States history. It is a time when humanity first set foot on the moon, a time when Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous I Have a Dream speech, a time when Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Who, Ken Heath, Grateful Dead all shared the stage together in Woodstock. 1960s is the decade when Stanley Kubrick made his sci-fi masterpiece 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It is when Truman Capote wrote his most famous works, such as In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's, and when the Beatles invaded the US music charts. Surely, it's a great decade, isn't it? Well, it's not all sunshines and rainbows though.
For once, the 1960s is where the Vietnam War started.
We humped down to the Perfume River to set in for the night.
At that time, the US were still fighting an ideological war with the Soviet Union, also famously known as the Cold War. The Vietnam War is one of US attempts to stop the spread of communist ideologies around the world. And the Vietnam War also became a microscale of the Cold War, as the spark of conflict started when the North Vietnamese government went against the French colony. They wanted to unify the country under a single communist regime, while the Southern government wanted a country more in line to the Western Bloc, such as the US, the UK. The United States military were first stationed in Vietnam in 1961, and since then it continued to grow larger and larger. However, both the USSR and Chinese gave massive military support to the Northern Vietnamese government. So the Vietnam War proved to be too costly for the United States, so they surrendered in 1975. However, in this video, we will explain something really unique. There is one movement that stood out during the 1960s, and that is
hippie is a countercultural movement that rejected the mores of mainstream American lives. The movement arose as an opposition towards the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War between the 1955 and the 1975. Feeling alienated from the middle-class society, which according to them is dominated by materialism and repression, hippies developed their own distinctive lifestyle. Hippies support love and nonviolence, making "make love, not war" their popular phrase, for which they were called flower children. They promoted tolerance and openness as alternatives to the restrictions and regimentations they saw in middle-class society. They also promote the recreational use of hallucinogenic drugs such as marijuana and LSD as a way to expand consciousness.
Hippies favor long hair and many men grew beards. Rimless granny glasses were popular among both men and women. Casual, often unconventional dress, sometimes in psychedelic colors, were popular among women, and sandals and beads were worn during the time by both men and women.
They commonly sought spiritual guidance from sources like Buddhism and other Eastern religions. However, contrary to their religiosity, hippies often practiced open sexual relationships and did exploration on their sexualities. For them, sexuality was used as a tool to protest against the catastrophes happening around them at that particular time.
Before the sexual revolution in the 60s, people enjoyed sexual relationship outside of marriage, but only few owned up to it in public. Young women and sometimes men who might have had sexual encounters with people who were not spouses risked from being expelled from schools, faculties, and even social sanctions. Moreover, homosexual people could have been imprisoned for their sexual preferences. Sexual revolution happened and also because of the tension due to the private attitudes and the public rules which ruled them. Young people invoked and used sex not only for pleasure but also a source of power and a new form of cultural policy which shook the American nation. Writers, artists, and musicians took on the culture of protest.
For example, John Lennon and Yoko Ono spent 7 days in bed in the Amsterdam Hilton Hotel's presidential suite in order to protest against the war and violence in the world, with hairpiece and bad peace signs above them. The Rolling Stones were also very popular in the 1960s. They took part in the Woodstock Festival, which is dubbed as 3 days of peace and music, where people show sexual liberation there, such as having free sex, showing breasts, and so on and so forth.
The sexual revolution of the 60s was created by these tensions that I already mentioned before, yet until that moment, it seemed to be progressive rather than revolutionary. People living in those times and not historians labeled these changes as sexual revolution.
They termed it like this even before the revolutionary gay liberation movement of 1969, the feminist movement, and Alex Comfort's 1972 book The Joy of Sex. Thus, the term sexual revolution is used since 1963, earlier than previously thought.
Throughout the 60s and beyond, a great number of young people started living together without being married, whereas sex was part of a relationship. Few used other concepts such as
pleasure or free love. Instead, they worded their relationship as family, sincerity, or implication. Other evolutions such as homosexual, feminist movement also considered as highlights of this era.
Changes of the 60s sexual behaviors were experimented and claimed as revolutionary because it mainly connected to the youth. Yet, sexual revolution was not limited to the young people only, since sexual freedom was only a part of the revolutionary purpose.
So what can we draw as a conclusion? What we can draw from the conclusion is that the fact that these hippies in the 60s were actually trying to liberate and trying to free American societies from old-fashioned sexual prejudices and rejection of highly exaggerated moral values. So basically, even if they are promoting free sex and free love wherever, whoever and whenever they want, what they do actually is protesting these values. They're rejecting these values because they don't want these values to be promoted as something that is good in the society, because they are sick and tired of all these prejudices that you should marry one person and you should stick with one person only. And this resulted in many experiments such as homosexuality, lesbianism, groupie love, and so on and so forth. Hippies are thought to be free in many aspects, and so is their love. Stone claims, free love in hippie culture meant that one could love whomever you please, whenever you please, and however you please. This approach to love resulted in an increase of spontaneous sexual activity and experiments, such as homosexuality, group sex, public sex, or even sex with minors. Regular sexual activity, such as sex between two adults of the opposite gender, was still common and dominant. But hippies accepted the concept of an open relationship, which left them to be free to experiment with various partners.
So the 1960s, one hell of a decade, isn't it? Full of bloody conflicts, war, oppression, and it's also one colorful decade.
It's something that we can definitely learn from. Thank you and peace out.